We have Alli Webb, who is a serial entrepreneur. She's a New York Times best-selling author, president of Canopy humidifiers, co-founder of Squeeze, Beckett and Quill, and most notably, of course, Drybar, which has scaled crazy successfully and eventually sold. And we're going to dig into all of those stories today. Alli, please come on and join us here to close out Playbook.
Hi, guys.
What's up, Alli?
Hey, Alli. How are you?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Awesome.
We're doing great. We're riding high. It's been a really fun event these last couple of days, and we're really excited to chat with you. First, I got to ask, I know we connected last week. How's Cookie?
Cookie good. She's sleeping on the bed. Very happy.
I don't have any cats, so I don't have any connection there. I apologize, but Jonathan's got
never
a cool
been a cat person.
Cat.
Yes, I know.
I know.
Obsessed with that cat after you told me about her or him.
Yeah, Bengals are pretty sweet. All right, but we're not here to talk about cats the whole time, but I had to ask.
I can talk about pets all day, but I don't think that's what the people are here for.
So you've done some awesome stuff. I mean, you were on the cover of Inc. magazine's How I Did This issue, named 100 Most Creative People in Business by Fast Company, Fortune's 40 Under 40 list, Marie Claire's Most Fascinating Women. You appeared as a guest on Shark Tank, which I don't know if you were on an episode with Damon, but Damon John is one of our investors. So we love the Shark Tank team.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we've got a lot to dig into today.
Yes. Can't wait. Thank you.
All right. I guess first, why don't you paint us a picture of kind of how Drybar became a thing? Like why blowouts, and why was that, what you eventually really focused in on scaling?
Well, I mean, it was a pretty organic process. I have naturally really curly hair. I grew up in South Florida, so it made my curly hair really frizzy and unmanageable. And, it was just like that thing for me as a kid that I was kind of obsessed with. As kids, we find these things that we hone in on. And, it was just always this thing. And I kind of didn't pay very close attention to it. And, after high school was pretty lost and didn't know what I wanted to do. And, spent my 20s pretty lost, not knowing what I wanted to do. And I didn't go to college. I moved to New York City. Anyways, very long story short, I did end up going to cosmetology school, totally fell in love with doing hair. And, would spend many, many years in hair salons, and then, jumping around to lots of other jobs and throughout my 20s and figuring out what I wanted to do. And when I moved to LA from New York, I was a mom, and I was a stay-at-home mom, and I really loved that and relished being home with my kids. But I kind of got this itch to get out there and do something for myself again. And my parents were entrepreneurs, so I came from that world, and it's definitely in my blood. But, I never really thought that much about it. And then when my kids were 3 and 5, and I, was lucky enough to stay home with them, I just got this burning desire to go do something on my own. So I started a mobile blowout business, which really was a way for me to get out of the house for a couple hours and do something I loved that I was pretty good at. And, get away from my kids for a couple hours is perfect. And what I did in that time was I decided to charge only $40 to go to women's homes and blow out their hair, which is unheard of in general, but especially in LA. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody for less than $150 to come to your house at the least. So, during that time, as I was operating this business, I realized that, there was a hole in the marketplace for a place for women to go to get a great blowout at a very affordable price, but in a beautiful, luxurious space. And that, that feeling of wanting that came out of my mobile business, because I got so busy, at the $40 price point, and the fact that I was pretty good at hair, I was I just got so busy so fast that I thought I either have to expand this somehow mobily, to meet all the demand that I was receiving, or open a brick and mortar. And that's when I went to my brother, who's a bald guy, not in the beauty industry, and was why can't women blow dry their own hair? So, I had to have that conversation. I don't know if I need to have that with you guys or not, but most men don't get it initially, but women instantly get it. And so, we started kind of noodling on this idea of turning my mobile business into a brick and mortar and opening, really the first of its kind blow dry bar, and, hoping it would resonate with women. And instinctually, I knew or felt if the price was right, women would come and do this often, and not just for, my brother always thought that it was like, initially it was going to be like if you had a wedding or, a bar mitzvah or, a special occasion, then you'd get a blowout, which I think was historically how it was. But I was like, I think women are just going to do this on a Tuesday to feel good if the price is right and the blowout's really great. So that's kind of how it started.
Well, I've got some homework for anyone that's listening that doesn't appreciate the value of a blowout already. Maybe if you're a guy or whatever, just go home and have someone else blow dry your hair and put a comb through it, because that's what I asked my wife to do. I was like, I need to understand this. And as I'm sitting there, she turns it on. I was like, okay, I get it. This is great. Right? I feel so pampered. It's very nice. Yeah.
It is interesting how it's all such a feeling, and it's such an intimate business. I mean, it feels so good to get your hair shampooed, as you know, from getting haircuts, and then to get it blown out, the white noise of the blow dryer. It's very relaxing. And then, as a woman, we do this like big reveal. You're not sitting in front of a mirror at Drybar. And when they see their hair, there is such a visual change in their whole demeanor, and they light up, and there's just a pep in their step. And it's like, we realized that we weren't selling blowouts. We were selling happiness and confidence that comes from having great hair.
Oh yeah, there's such a brand experience thing there, which I definitely want to get into. But I want to start with just this first location, because you were doing the mobile blowout service, but then you opened a brick and mortar location. And it seems like you kind of had this, if I build it, they will come sort of thing. And they came in droves. And so were you asking people like, hey, if I had a brick and mortar location, would you come? Or what gave you the confidence to actually take that leap?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from the success I was seeing at my mobile business, which was a $40 price point, I knew I wanted to kind of come at it in the same way for a brick and mortar, for a location. And so we started at $35, even less. And I as not like, a proven like business person, and there was no business plan, there was no model, there was nothing. There was like, I think this is going to work. And I had enough like friends in LA and clients in LA that anybody I talked to, any woman I talked to was like, oh my God, yes, this is we need this. And then after we opened, for years, I've heard, people have been saying to me, I had this idea, I wish I had done it, but it's a very, very hard business to operate. And it's a lot, and for me, having been in the hair industry for as long as I had, and I've worked for owners of salons, and I've just been so immersed in this world and culture for so many years. And it was so like perfectly, suited to take on this role. And it's a lot of work, but, yeah, I mean, I think it was like a lot of those women gave me a lot of confidence. And I mean, we had, investors who would invest later down the road. A lot of my brother's friends, who I still like to give a hard time about this, who were like, what? Your sister wants to open what? And I was like, I'm telling you, I would never have imagined it would turn into 150 locations in this massive product line. I did not see all that, but I thought surely one location in Brentwood would work, and we significantly underestimated how well
it worked. Yeah.
So why were you so sure though? Because like you said, you weren't a proven business person. Like was this your first foray into entrepreneurship? Like, where did that confidence to do this come from versus like, I'm going to get a part-time job to spend those hours away from the kids, right?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think it's, again, the fact that like, I never really liked working for people. I always wanted to do my own thing. And I think that largely comes from my parents. I did work for a lot of people though, for a long time. And I think it was like a personal necessity thing that I felt like, I had this very strong gut feeling that there was enough women out there who felt the way I felt and would really love to have like a weekly blowout because their hair was hard to handle. It was in my gut. And then I was getting reassurance from my clients, that they were like, yes, if you build this, we'll definitely come to it, and I heard that enough. But it was definitely like, a lot of people were like, I don't know, like, how do you make this work for $35? You need to have a ton of people coming through, which was true. So, I was certainly like cautiously optimistic, but also, and I think it's important to say, I've always felt like, and I think that you have to have this like this mentality as an entrepreneur. It's like, of course there was a chance it wasn't going to work. And in hindsight, it's hard to imagine, but we didn't know it was going to work. It was also in the middle of a recession, but I always had this like feeling of, if this doesn't work, like nobody's going to die. We're going to lose some money and that will really suck. But like, we'll go figure something else out because we're pretty smart, capable people. And at that time, it was just me, my brother, and my now ex-husband. But I think it was just like, let's just give it a shot and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, like the world's not going to fall apart. We're just going to, lick our wounds and move on. And I think you just have to have that kind of like fearlessness of like, failure is an option, but we're going to, try it anyway.
Failure is an option, but we're going to try it anyway. I love that. So a lot of people that are listening in the chat are probably in either the stage where they're kind of where you were in the mobile business, or maybe they're in the stage of the first brick and mortar location, or maybe they're in the stage of the second and third location. And so can you talk us through how you beta tested things at that first location and when you expanded from there?
Well, I mean, I think that we might be a little bit of an anomaly because it was like just lightning in a bottle. I mean, we were so busy so fast. So the first one was like bananas, and we were so busy. We were like the hot club you can't get into. I didn't have enough stylists. Like we couldn't ramp fast enough. But I'll tell you, when we opened the second store, which is Studio City, which was 6 months later, which at the time felt like a lifetime. And my brother had finally come over full time. He was doing something else when we first opened. And, I was like, we can't open another location fast enough. We have all this demand in Brentwood, but Studio City did not like take off as fast as Brentwood did. And it was a little bit of like an, oh shit moment. Maybe this was like we were like a one-hit wonder and that was it, but in the spirit of like true entrepreneurship, I mean, we pulled a lot of levers. I used to go to like, I knew a lot of moms because I had moved to LA and that was like the community I was in. And I was going and setting up at like the school auctions, where for those who have kids, like they have these auctions where you set up a table and you sell your stuff, and we would sell blowout bundles at a discounted price because we knew if we could just get people in the door to experience Drybar, we knew they would fall in love with it. We knew there was a reason that the Brentwood shop took off the way it did. We just had to get people in the door to experience it and fall in love with it. And that is ultimately what we did. We did like Groupon. You remember Groupon back in the day? Like we did all.
Oh yeah, of course.
Around? I don't think so.
I think it's still around, but
But I mean, and it was kind of
different.
like,
I think it's changed. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so we just did everything we had to do to like keep going. And it was the same thing. And it did eventually build. And it is actually today one of our strongest shops in the system. But it was the same thing with West Hollywood, which was like our third location. It was like, we built this big, beautiful store on Sunset Boulevard. And it was so slow for like the first 6 months, which we don't really talk about all that much, but it was, it wasn't like a snap of our fingers. It was a lot of work. And I think it's a good lesson because I think people from now, especially 12 years later, you look at Drybar and you're like, it's this massive hit. And it was, but it wasn't like a slam dunk. It took a lot of hard work.
Now, as you open location 2 and then location 3, how hard was it to keep all of these operating the same way, having that same feel, the magic that you established in that first location? How hard was it to replicate that as you expanded?
I mean, it was very, very hard. And as somebody who had no experience in like operations or, spreadsheets or, real business, like I knew how to run a shop and I knew how to be there hands-on. I knew when clients were unhappy, I could tell, and I knew how customer service should be and how the shop should look and feel and the music and all of that stuff. But like getting people paid, I mean, I was like, and that was like my task in the early days. And I remember saying to my brother, like, I'm not the best person to be doing payroll. Like, I just didn't have like the mind for it. I figured it out, but as we grew and scaled and we slowly started to bring on more and more people to help us, we very quickly realized that we needed to hire people who had more experience in growing and scaling a business because there was so much we didn't know and way more that we didn't know that we didn't know. Like when we hired, our first big hire was this woman who came in as a president, and she had like worked for Taco Bell, and she put in a head of operations and like all these systems, and like things got so much more organized, and people weren't complaining that they weren't getting paid, and our vendors were getting paid. I mean, all the things that were just like, we were like on a rocket ship. And so it was like trying to just keep the wheels from coming off most days. So the growing and scaling was quite challenging.
Did you have any horror stories, any consistency horror stories where like, oh, over here we're doing like champagne toast, and over here they're bringing in like last night's spaghetti?
I mean, I think it was like whack-a-mole is the best way I can describe it. It was just like we'd have one thing under control, and then there'd be another problem. And gosh, I haven't thought about this in so long. When we first opened Brentwood, it must have been like 3 months into it. And our shop was below a restaurant. And one day it's like the shop's packed, every chair is full. And I noticed like some like black, like goopy stuff coming from the ceiling. And I was like, what is that? And within like seconds, it like, whoosh, like this, like, I mean, I don't know. I still to this day don't, it looked like char or something, or garbage. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was so terrible. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. The funniest part of that story is that it didn't actually fall on anybody, but it was very close to the first chair. And like the client was like, kind of looked at it and like moved the chair over and like, can we finish? Like, it was like, we just have to keep going, And so it was like, things like that kind of kept happening. We didn't have the, like our phones were a whole big disaster because and like, imagine the scenario, I don't know if you guys have been into a Drybar, but I'm sure people on have, it's loud. The music's going loud. The blow dryers are loud. It's just loud. And what we very quickly realized within days of opening, that the phone we had set up at the front desk where people check in and check out, it was like nearly impossible to hear the person on the phone. And trying to manage this like influx of people that were constantly coming in and out of Drybar and be on the phone was like, no way. And we were so overwhelmed by that. And like, everybody was looking at me like, what do we do? And I had to say, like, we have to just let these calls go to voicemail and we'll call them back, because I wanted to give the person in the shop the experience that was like looking at my face and paying and whatever. And so then we had to quickly like get into the call center business. And that was like, what? Like, we don't know that world at all, So there were so many things that we had to like figure out as we grew, because it was just, we didn't know. So those are
that's such a good lesson though, is for anybody listening, about like, so often you neglect the customers you have because you're focused on the new, right? And in that situation, it's like, if you neglected the people in the chair to go and grab that call, the calls would eventually stop, because the people in the chair would stop telling everybody else about their amazing experience at Drybar.
Exactly. And that was the beauty of Drybar, and such a huge part of our success, I so humbly believe, you were getting a great blowout. You were in a really beautiful space, but like, you were treated really well. And also in LA, most nice hair salons, like, you kind of feel a little intimidated, and there's like, and I lived in New York and LA most of my life. So I always felt a little intimidated when I would walk into a really nice salon that you didn't have like the right bag, or you weren't whoever. And, we never wanted there to be that air in Drybar. And so a huge part of that was like, it makes my skin crawl to think of like somebody being on the phone and just being like, just 1 second, like that whole thing was like, no way, we're not going to do that. And I do think it goes a long way into, the experience, and that they're coming back, and, you can get to the phone later. And it was really hectic. And crazy.
So in those early stages, when you're scaling quickly like that, sometimes the chaos can be excusable, because people are like, yeah, things are crazy and changing every day. And so how did you sort of rally the team around this vision of what you were building? What was your messaging to everyone that, we're opening a ton of locations, and here's what you're a part of super early? Yeah.
I mean, it was such a breath of fresh air, I think, especially for the salon industry in general. And, as somebody who's worked in this business, who, came out of beauty school pretty lost, and historically you have to work for another stylist until you kind of build up the confidence and the clientele to go on your own. Drybar kind of was bridge that gap, and, stylists were able to out of beauty school and then have in the industry, stylists really felt like they were a part of something and they were building this alongside us. And I mean, at least that's how we really thought about it. And, and it was there was definitely stylists that, didn't want to wash their own hair, their own clients, and they wanted to go smoke in between every client. And we're it's just not like that here. We are and I didn't know what it was going to be like, but we very quickly learned it was going to be very busy. And, you're kind of in this with us together or you're not. And it was not unlike traditional salons where it's very competitive. You eat what you kill. Everybody's out for themselves. Drybar was a very family dynamic. It's it was the impetus for Drybar and the way, we thought about our stylists was we wanted clients to come in and be able to sit in any station and with any stylist and get a great blowout, albeit different, from stylist to stylist, but that they were Drybar clients, not like Alli's client, and that mentality, I think, really created a team environment. And, we always felt like we wanted to do special things for our stylists. We always gave our managers a certain amount of budget to go and do whatever they wanted. If it was a hot day, get everybody Jamba Juice or, whatever it was. And we bought food for people all the time. And there was as we grew, a lot of opportunities to grow. So, and I think just the fact that Drybar was also getting so much attention and it was the first of its kind, people really, got excited to be part of it.
In my last session before you came on, I was talking to Dan Tyre from HubSpot, and he said that their one policy they have is use good judgment. And it seems like you gave your managers that autonomy to just kind of act and take care of people and treat everyone like a team. And in a big way, I'm sure that helped you scale. So did you always want to franchise, or did that come later?
I did not want to franchise, not at all, actually. And it was really kind of a contention point for my brother and I, because I think we realized pretty early that we were going to need to grow this fast because we had a lot of people who were trying to mimic what we were doing, which was, I remember at the time being so freaked out by it and watching other, blow dry bars pop up. And ultimately, we would ultimately learn is they didn't have the secret sauce, and there were so many things baked into it.
They weren't as good.
Yeah, they just weren't. And so much of that feedback came from clients who couldn't get into Drybar. And so they would go there and they'd come back and they're I don't know why, it just wasn't as good. I'm I know why, but that's a different story. But because, I was just, I had such a tight, grip on this business. And I was so afraid somebody else would mess it up, and I was just really very scared it was so new. And I spent the first 6 months I was there, open to close 7 days a week. I mean, it was my baby and I just couldn't leave it. And I just felt entrepreneurs, rightfully so, have a lot of ideas and things that they want to do. And it would end up being an issue sometimes where you have your own money in this is your business and you have ideas of things that you think might work. But I wanted things to be very specific, and that, customer service, and the fact that, we only do blowouts and we're not, doing makeup or nails or anything else, to fill in the gaps. It was we do one thing and we're really good at it. And that was really important to me. So my brother really wanted to franchise and I was pretty against it. But we, our first couple of franchises were Dallas and Arizona, and we vetted the people that our partners, really closely. And for the most part, they've all been pretty great. There's been a couple that didn't work and a few that we bought back along the way. But however, now I feel very differently because I think that, franchising is such a great vehicle to flag plant really, and to get you more locations quicker. You just have to have a really tight team. And, it's interesting with one of my other businesses, Squeeze, which is a massage concept, we're doing it from the get-go exclusively franchise. And I think to date, we've sold 50 in the last 6 months. And, it's just such a great opportunity for somebody who wants this turnkey, solution and be able to open their own shop without having to do all the heavy lifting in the beginning. And then they have their money and their blood, sweat, and tears in it, and they're going to work harder, which is kind of what we learned with Drybar versus having a manager. which is like a little bit of a crapshoot. Sometimes you get somebody great, sometimes you don't. And then if you don't, and it's across the country, it's really hard to manage. So, I ultimately came around to, franchising being probably better.
So what were some of the hiccups from the early stages of franchising Drybar that you are like proactively avoiding with launching with franchisees right from the get-go with Squeeze?
Well, we run a much tighter ship now because Drybar was like kind of franchise. We had stores franchise and we had company owned. Our infrastructure wasn't built to support franchising alone. We brought in people to help that, but it was just like, there was like company owned stores and there was franchise stores, and we stumbled around for a long time trying to figure out how to support the franchisees and like how it all worked together, which is really challenging as an organization to be running essentially two different businesses, not to mention we were also running a product business. So it was just like a cluster for a long time. And with Squeeze, we also had the foresight of Brittany Driscoll, who's our CEO and co-founder of Squeeze, was the head of marketing at Drybar for many years. And so she saw how inefficient our system was at Drybar. It took us a long time to get more efficient, and like learned a lot of those mistakes of like how, the vetting process and making it more seamless and knowing what to look for and what not to look for. And, we probably jumped the gun on some with Drybar because our vetting process wasn't as precise as it is now. And, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through in order to get a Squeeze franchise. And Brittany's done such a beautiful job with that. There's been people that have like come all the way down the line, and, then Michael and I get on a call with them and we're like, I don't know, it's like they're, and so we're really discerning on who we bring on. And I think that's a big part of it.
Well, we're here recording this in Scottsdale, Arizona, 5 minutes down the street from what I think was one of your first franchises that my wife was a very frequent customer of.
Yes.
Yesterday, we had Seth Godin on. He said to tell you hi, by the way.
I love him.
We were asked.
You're a friend of my brother's.
Yeah, he's great. So we were asking him about creativity versus systemization. And he said we should talk to you about that on when you've got a system of a franchise. How do you allow there to be some innovation, but also maintain the standards that your customers expect?
It's a lot of communication. And I'll tell you, I can give you examples of franchisees who do it well and who didn't. I won't name which stores these things happened in, but, there was franchisees who, would go a little rogue and try something out. And like, I remember walking into this one store in this one city, and they were, we were at the time we had done this like short thing with like these like Drybar t-shirts, and it was just a silly thing. And the direction was like, they were just a fun thing, and it really wasn't the right thing, but whatever it was, it was like to tie them up with a yellow bow and leave them at the front desk. And it was like, more of an afterthought. But I walked into the store and there was like a rack of the shirts hanging. And I was like, no, we're not like having a rack, and it was like, not a malicious thing. It was just like that. I just don't want, we don't sell clothes. And as a new customer, you walk in and you see a clothing rack, you get confused of like, what is this place? What are they doing? And for me, it's like, I'm a very like, I'm such a particular consumer. And when I walk into a place, like you instantly get a feeling of what it is. And I felt very like, no, this is exactly why I didn't want to franchise. Like I had a bit of a brat moment. I've come a long way in temper tantrum land. To, another franchisee in another city who would like, call us up and say, hey, I have this idea that we're thinking of, of implementing and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times it was like, oh, we've actually, and this is why it's so important to have communication. We've actually thought about that and tried that. And here's why it didn't work. Or that's a great idea. We haven't tried it. Why don't you try it and report back to us and tell us how it works before it just becomes this like, this shop does this and this shop does that. For us, it was so important that the consistency in all the ways from shop to shop to shop, which by the way, was like the best compliment I could get, which I, gratefully got so much, was like, oh, I was in New York, or I was in, Arizona, or I was in Dallas, or, wherever I was. And the experience was exactly the same. And that to me was like the overarching goal. Was like, you could be sitting in a Drybar and not know what city you're in, because there was so much consistency, and people really love that consistency. And when you have franchisees who are trying little things here and there, it just, I think it just chips away at the ultimate experience of like, doing it the way we all do it. And it creates that like brand loyalty. And by the way, I don't think it's always wrong. We would always say there's probably a lot of right ways to do whatever, but there's one way we do it. And if you're going to be a franchisee and a partner of ours, we want you to do it the way we're doing it. And that doesn't mean it can't change and evolve 100%. And we don't know everything. We haven't thought of everything, but the communication is the key of like, let's have a conversation before you implement something new.
Yeah. What kind of cadence do you think about innovation on, right? Because there is an importance of saying like, this is the way we do it here. This is how it works. And this is our consistent standards. But there's also there's got to be room to try things, right? There's got to be room to innovate and figure out like today's standard might not be tomorrow's best, right? So like, how do you control that at scale? Like where you want to try new things and want to leave room for innovation, but also want to make sure it stays consistent.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of been, was the process over the last, handful of years, was like, we would constantly be trying new things, whether it was internally or with specific shops. We had a lot of training shops that were like specifically for franchisees and or managers to go in and train. And, I'd say like one of the biggest innovations for us was actually like putting a training process in for our stylists. Because as you can imagine, each store has 60-ish stylists, and training everybody and getting them out on the floor. And, we redefined that so many times to try to figure it out and make it better and figure out, because, not every stylist started from the same place. Some had a lot more experience and only needed, a week of training. And some stylists were brand new and we saw potential in them, but they probably needed like 3 weeks of training. And so how do you, scale that from shop to shop and have this one system in place that, does it, which was, really hard to figure out and to make scalable. And, there was lots of things like that, from our stylists to our managers, and like, and not my strong suits, putting like systems in place and figuring all that stuff out, that really required us bringing on people who had that kind of mind, who would, put system in place. And, we started making manuals and making things like very much easier to follow, like a system, versus me just coming in and telling people how things should be, So yeah, I mean, there's totally room for innovation, and there's other places too. I mean, just in terms of like our hairstyles, while most of them are classic, how we introduce new ones from time to time. And then there was the product division, which was like we were always innovating and bringing in new product launches. So yeah, lots.
So what I'm hearing is the key to your success was really training manuals, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, I mean, that was
but let's talk about the product line. You mentioned the product, and that was an innovation. And so was the product line an idea again from the beginning, or when did that come into the fold?
Well, very, very early on, I wanted product, because what I found was I was using product lines that I liked from years of doing hair, but it was like kind of a mishmash of products, and they weren't, specially designed for blowouts. And what that really translates to is like when women get, blowouts, and your wife can attest to this, that you want it to last as long as possible. So if you're using products that are too heavy or weigh the hair down, that blowout that you could have lasted 3 or 4 days is now lasting 1 or 2 days. And so, I really felt really strongly that I wanted to bring in products and develop products, that were crafted perfectly for the blowout, which is really what we started to do. But I had no idea how to do that. So we had to bring on, people to help us do that. And it was a really fun process, but, wasn't initially something we were thinking about doing. And it wouldn't be until we raised some private equity money that, we earmarked some of that money to really start working on the product line, which, we would eventually sell for $255 million. So that worked out.
Yeah, just slide that right in there. But yeah, I mean, did you expect to sell that piece of the business from starting it, or did you
No.
realize that your competency was totally in a different area, and as it got bigger, it just didn't make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that. I mean, what happened, which was just so beautiful, was that we were getting all this notoriety, the stores were growing, and credibility. And so when we decided to start a product, it was like a product line. We only had a handful of stores around the country, which felt like a lot to us, but really like it was such a small amount of women we could actually service. So I went on QVC and we launched with Sephora, and it was like, if you can't get to a Drybar, you can buy the products that our stylists use in Drybar. So it was just such this perfect, like chocolate peanut butter thing that, we had built this credibility with building this brand. And now we're going to add products that we're actually using, that we actually support and love, which was also like a weird thing in the industry. I remember when I lived in New York City, like salons, like Jean-Louis David, and there was like these like kind of like discount chain salons where they'd have like a Moroccan oil bottle in the window, but they wouldn't actually use Moroccan oil on you. It was like, what? Like, I never understood that, but it was like very authentic to us of like, this is what we use. And if you use this, you can get close to how we do it in the shop. And that was really such a great selling point. And it was very authentic. And so people wanted to buy like a little piece of Drybar.
And it was genius because, I bought one of the, the yellow blow dryers for my wife, and I walk into Sephora and I'm walking down the aisles. I don't know any of these brands, but then I see Drybar and I'm like, oh, she's been there. She loves it there. I'll get that one. And so I'm sure you sold a ton of them as a result of that.
Yeah. I mean, the product business was so strong and truly like such a surprise. I'll never forget the night before that product launched and being like, I don't know, if this is going to work. And we were scared. And we did a test with Sephora in like 75 doors, and they have like 300 or something. And it was like out of the gate, so strong. And like I said, people just, really wanted like exactly what you explained. There was such a brand identity that, not a lot of other brands could claim. And so, and the product was good and it smelled really good. And so people, were drawn to it. And so it really worked. And, then we found ourselves in this like second business that we also didn't know how to run.
So you got this started with your brother. And ironically, at the beginning of this conference, we started out with Allison and Wes Felix. Allison Felix is the Olympian track and field, and Jonathan and I are brothers. So I'm curious, how did that sibling dynamic play into the very early days of Drybar?
Well, my brother and I had actually worked together in a previous life. When we were both working for a designer, Nicole Miller, when we lived in New York, and we had brought her concept, her stores back to South Florida where we grew up. And, within a year we had a store in Meisner Park in Boca Raton, and then we were in Miami. And I must have been like 21 and super young. And I was basically running these two retail shops, and it was so like, not what I wanted to be doing. And Michael and I were fighting a lot. And I think a lot of it was because we were both like not really like happy with what we were doing. And then my brother and I had always been really close. I don't know if you guys have always been tight, but we were always close. And it was this thing that like felt like it was breaking up our friendship, that we were like, I think we got to stop working together. And it was really that, it got so volatile between us, and we were like screaming at each other in the store. It was like so embarrassing. I mean, it was bad. And, but I remember it was like, it pushed me to this point of, I'm so unhappy doing this. I've been trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. This isn't it. And the only thing I really want to do is hair. And I went to my brother, like so scared that he was going to kill me for saying this. But I was like, Mike, I don't want to do this. Like I'm not happy. And I think I want to go to beauty school. And he was the first person I told. And, he was like, I think that's a great idea. You love hair, you love people. Like, it's perfect. My parents, not so much, but anyways, had Michael and I not had that negative experience, when we did come back to, we decided to do this, with Drybar, I was like, it was a little bit of like a come to Jesus meeting where I was like, it can't be the way it was then. And we had boundaries, and we of course, how to push each other's buttons when you're brother and your siblings. And, we had that conversation, which I think was really important, but even more than that, I think the playing field was pretty level, because I knew hair way better than he did. And I'd been in this industry and I knew that, but he had more of a business acumen than I did. And he knew how to do stuff that I didn't. So there was a lot of respect from him to me, because I knew this industry, and then vice versa for me to him. And I think that also is important to point out, that in a partnership, and I'm sure it's like this with you guys too, it's like, everybody can't do the same thing. Everyone has their different strengths and weaknesses. And, what I contributed and did for the brand was very different than what my brother did for the brand. So we had very different roles. And so they didn't really overlap a lot. And, if something had to do with hair or customer service or the shops or whatever, that was kind of my lane, and business stuff and leases and all that stuff was his. And that really worked.
Yeah, definitely important to have clear, separate lanes. That's worked well for us too.
Totally. So you have a couple new things going on, right? So we've already talked about Squeeze, which that makes a ton of sense. I think like new franchise, it's in the personal pampering space, right? But then you've also got jewelry and humidifiers, and it's like, what is the line of best fit here? Are you serving that, like, when you look at the core Drybar customer, it's like, well, they also like jewelry and like, humidify air and like, are you serving the same person, or are these just different business like idea itches you had to scratch?
Well, I think it's like more falls under the like affordable luxury halo, because I think, Squeeze was felt like such a natural extension. And there's so many similarities with Squeeze to Drybar. It was like blowouts had existed forever. There just wasn't a good place to go at an affordable price and all of that. And Squeeze is the same thing. It's like massages have been around forever, but historically you either go to a spa and you overpay, or you go to a discount chain and you don't know what you're getting, and the experience isn't great, and all the things that go along with that. We felt like there was an opportunity to improve the massage space, same with the blow dry space. So, it was like, we can make you feel like you're in a really luxurious high-end establishment, but you're not, paying a high end price. And then, also with Squeeze, it was like, there was such room for innovation of technology. I mean, it took us about a year to build the app that you use. You book on it, you tip on it. You don't pay when you come in, you pay when you feel like it, in the privacy of your phone, So there was a lot of like innovation that made Squeeze much more like convenient, which I think, Drybar does that as well. And then with Canopy, when I first started talking to the Canopy guys, I also was like, what, like humidifiers and what, I really didn't understand it. But what I very quickly learned, which was pretty life-changing for me, is that, it is a huge beauty hack. And as dudes, I don't know if this will resonate with you, but for women, especially, hydrated skin is just better skin. And even like for anybody really, if you live in like Nicaragua or South Florida, and you constantly have that humidity on your face, your skin looks glowier and brighter. And when your skin is really dry, you see fine lines and wrinkles. And of course that has to do with your scalp and your hair. And so anyways, I got introduced to the founder of Canopy, and I was originally talking to him about doing another product line, which I may end up doing. But, he was like, we have this company, this brand Canopy, and they're reimagined. So they look really nice and chic. They're not blue and ugly. They're anti-mold. And they've just kind of reinvented something that existed and made it a lot better. And there's like essential oils, and you put this little puck, and it's the whole thing. But, ultimately the reason that I love it is because it's really improved my skin and the appearance of my skin, which makes, makeup and everything go on better, and my hair is healthier and all the things. So I was like, I think this is something that women kind of everywhere need to know about, and felt like, this felt like a fun new project for me to get involved with. So I'd say like the lens in which I look at these kinds of businesses, including the jewelry, line, is all like things that are like, feel good products that, you can afford and really enjoy.
When I think of humidifiers, I think you might have said this in the past. I was reading about it, but when I think of humidifiers, I think of like the Vicks vapor rub and being
course.
super sick, and it's next to my bed, you know. So, but you're totally redesigning that, and it's for a different use. So I see it. I love it.
Yeah,
The
really,
new pro.
yeah, it's such an unlock for people. Sorry to interrupt, but there is this, like, everybody has a humidifier story, and chances are you threw it away because it gets moldy and disgusting. And this one, it's dishwasher safe. You just change a filter. It's really interesting, and it's definitely like, it's an interesting place for me to be because Drybar was such a rocket ship, and Canopy. There's a lot of education that's needed, which is part of why I came in this like beauty role. But yeah, it's like one person at a time.
So you have experience scaling both service businesses and product businesses. How do you think that they're different? What are the intricacies about one or the other, since we've got people listening that might have either?
They're so different. And I consider myself like pretty well versed in like the retail brick and mortar space. And I think that there's a way to, I understand, I think, the way to run a really successful store and what's needed. And the direct to consumer business is very challenging. And it's a completely different animal that I'm enjoying learning. And, I'm kind of like hungry to talk to people all the time about how to scale a direct to consumer business. And it's changed. I've learned so much. It used to be like you could turn on a couple of ads and like, where it's like, I think part of it was COVID, like the whole world shifted to D2C, and like, it's just so saturated that it's really hard to stand out in that world. So, I'm in the process right now of like pulling a lot of different levers on our different businesses that are direct to consumer to see, what works and how do you really get the word out there. And it's like, it's so many different things. And it's just so much harder. When you have a captive person in a space, you get a real opportunity to win them over. But online, there's so much, noise that it's definitely harder.
So what are you trying? What are you experimenting with, or what's working right now?
Well, for online, like, you mean the direct to consumer world? Yeah.
Cutting through the noise.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we're trying to, with Canopy, especially, it's like, we find that like user generated videos, that getting people to like really authentically talk about their experience using the humidifier and how much it's changed, because we hear those stories all the time. It's just getting people to like publicly talk about that. And, like the influencer world is really interesting. And, for me, it's like, I feel like, I always feel like I don't love the idea of like paying somebody to talk about your product, but it is kind of the world we live in. And there is that piece of it where you have to, I feel like we should just gift people that would, and they would talk about it, but it just, we don't live in that world anymore, so and we have lots of teams at Canopy that are, digging into data and seeing what people like and what people don't like. I think that's a piece of it too, which is, kind of similar to what I was talking about at Drybar, is like finding people who have experience in growing brands and they know what works and what levers to pull and what not to. And like A/B testing and, figuring out like, does this ad perform better than this ad, and running so many different ads that you understand what resonates with people, and it's like, not just like 4 or 5, but like 100 different ones, which of course is like budget, and it takes time and money to do that. So, there's just like, you got to kind of keep going down this path of trying all these different things to see like something will finally like, click.
Yeah, I hear that all the time talking to other small business owners and marketers, that are like, we tried Instagram ads and it just didn't work for us. And it's like, well, you tried it with $50 and one image, right? There's
amazing
such importance to like having that matrix of scale. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just, it's like, you never know what's going to resonate with people. And yeah, I mean, I've been in that boat too, where like, oh, we tried this and it didn't work, but there's, even like for Beckett and Quill, I had a call today with a guy who runs marketing agency. And it was like, I know that there's so much low hanging fruit. I just don't know how to capture it all right now. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that. And, and a lot of that is like hiring somebody like that who has done this before and has a proven track record and knows how to do this testing and what to do. And I mean, it's one of the things I say all the time is like, I've said it a couple of times today already. It's like, you just need to hire people who have experience where you don't, to help you, grow. And to just say, well, we tried this and it's not working. It's like, you probably didn't really exhaust all the possibilities, and, and somebody else can come and tell you that you need to try other things.
Yeah. You've talked about that in a lot of different stories now, is right. Like hiring for the person that knows the thing that you don't, or at some point, just needing to hire and staff up. Right. What in all of these stories and experiences and businesses, what have been, you could take this one of two ways, I guess, what have been your challenges in finding the right people for the right roles that you need at the time? Or maybe like what has become like your trick to finding the right people?
Well, I think it's like having, at Drybar for sure, it was like, I was always a big believer in like hire fast, fire fast. Like you can pretty quickly tell if someone's going to work or not work, and not being afraid. I was always very frustrated when we had managers or whomever that, wanted to like really, not to say that I don't think people are capable of a second chance and learning and growing for sure. But I think there's also sometimes it's like, if you're, we're growing a business here and this person isn't, it doesn't get it, isn't on the same page with us. They're not a bad person. They're just not aligned with what we're trying to do here. So I feel like, for me, and I especially have experienced this a lot with like Beckett and Quill, it's like, we've hired a few different like marketing people and people to help us with ads, and it's like, it just hasn't been the right fit. And I've, very quickly said, nope, like we're done. We're not doing this anymore. This isn't working, just in terms of like how they were approaching things. Not to say that, it just somebody who, I definitely want somebody who's willing to like reinvent and keep coming up with new ideas, versus somebody who's, just doesn't feel like the right fit, isn't aligned, isn't also really excited about what you're doing. There's something really valuable that I found about, somebody who's just really willing to roll up their sleeves and try and do whatever it takes to like make something work, and a positivity, which I think, in my experience, there's a lot of people who come along who, can get like pretty negative pretty quickly and just like, this didn't work, and they don't, and so I think it's just like, I want to say like not going through people fast, but like being able to like recognize when something's not working and move on and keep networking and keep asking people. I mean, I leverage my network all the time and ask, people for help, and, and talking to as many people as you can out in the world of your particular network about things that are working and things aren't working in your business. And like, oh, you know what, you should talk to this guy. He knew, how to grow, X, Y, and Z. And so go talk to that guy and see if they're willing to have a conversation. By way of example, we're talking to somebody right now for Beckett and Quill who grew another business, into a huge business. And so I was like, I want to talk to that guy, and we had a conversation with him, and, and we're going to give him some equity because we can't afford to hire him right now, which is another thing to consider, which we definitely did in the early days of Drybar too, was like, if you don't have the money to hire somebody, like giving somebody equity, and then there's so much skin in the game, and they're just as driven as you are to really build and grow this thing, so it's kind of just like, keep on trying, keep on talking to new people, and keep on seeing what you can find out.
Well, we've got some questions from the audience too, so I want to make sure that we get these in. This one is from Sanjay Mangabi from Vet Method, and it is, how important is it to go with your gut as opposed to what the market says or wants?
I'm like a gut girl. I mean, I feel like I've never been I hate focus groups. Like I'm not a big fan of like, figuring out what's the statement I'm trying to say? Like, decision by committee, I think that it's certainly helpful to have opinions from people that you trust. And of course you want to pay attention to what's going on in the market, but whatever's happening in the market has already happened, and so it's like, what is, you know, if you're coming up with something new, it's new because nobody's thought of it. So no one's thinking about it or buying it, you know? So I'm such a big believer in like in gut. And I think, you know, of course there's something to be said for, you know, talking, you know, I believe in like, you know, anecdotally getting information from people, like randomly talking to people about things. And you can kind of see very quickly how somebody reacts to something you're doing, which I, you know, totally found to be true with Drybar. It was like, you know, women would light up when I would talk about that. I'm thinking about this idea, you know, what do you think? Like for sure. But I don't think it's, you know, for me, it's always been gut. You know, I'm such a big, it's believer in gut, and it's never really steered me wrong.
Yeah, that's great. All right, next one
agree.
here. What?
No, I just said I 100% agree.
Yeah. All right, next one. This is interesting. So maybe if you think about your experience in Drybar, this is when you're training people to do what may be repetitive, routine, or mundane kind of work. How do you make sure that they stay happy in that work? And this is from Adam at the Hill at Musa.
It's a great question, and it's a tough one. You know, I think that the best thing I can tell you is that I think it's important to talk, to really communicate with whomever you're training or you know, trying to teach something to, of like, you know, how what's the best way to motivate you? Is it money? Is it, you know, at the end of the rainbow, there's a different job waiting for you? Is it like, in my case, you know, without knowing what this business is, you know, is like at Drybar, like, do you want to go and do, you know, work in product or do photo shoots with us? You know, it's like giving people some sort of incentive to learn what they're, you know, what you're trying to teach, with like some, like, you know, it's like the carrot and the stick. Like there's got to be something that's interesting to them about getting to the finish line. And then just also in communication with how people learn. I mean, like, I'm such a visual person, like, you know, to be like lectured at is hard for me, but if you show me something, I can grasp it better. So again, it's like communication. And I think that was such a big, you know, thing with us at Drybar, was like talking to our stylists about, you know, what they liked about their job and what they didn't like about their job, and what are the things that would get them more excited to work towards. And, you know, and it's time consuming, you know, to talk to every single person, but it also makes those people feel very seen and very appreciated. And you'd be surprised the information you get back from somebody of being like, hey, you know, tell me, like, how can I, you know, what will be the most impactful to you? And having that open dialogue with your team, I think, is like crucial.
Yeah, love that.
All right. This one is a question from Tamara Kemper at the Process Mavens. How do you prepare yourself when you feel that you're on the edge of leveling up to a big, scary level you've never been to before? So this, I guess, goes back to that gut question, is like, when you're about to go to that next level, how do you prepare yourself?
Well, I mean, it takes me back to, you know, I remember when we raised the first big round of money we raised, which was 25 million, which was, you know, so crazy. And, you know, but then we formed, you know, a formal board. And I remember being in those board meetings and feeling really intimidated because, you know, I always felt, you know, like those guys were so much smarter than me, and they, you know, they had the money, and they just, it was a really intimidating room for me to be in. And I remember I would, you know, my brother and I would be in board meetings, and I would text him like under the table questions that I was like scared to ask out loud. And his response was always like, that's a good question, you should ask it, you know? And so, you know, my brother really helped me get over that hump of like imposter syndrome and this thing that like, you're not smart enough or good enough, which I definitely had, you know? And so I think it's like, I don't know the actual answer for you specifically, but I think it's, you know, kind of starting to believe in yourself in this very unapologetic way, that like, if you've gotten yourself to this far where you're about to go here, you've done something right. And so to really own that and like really like step into that role and like believe it yourself, you know, if you believe it, other people will believe it. And I ultimately like came to learn that as well.
That's so smart and well said. I remember being in an early board meeting, same thing with Jonathan, right after we raised a similar kind of round. And it really forces you to level up, but you think, okay, well, I'm here. Like, I'm here for a reason. We passed the test. We got to this point. And it's, yeah. And it's the same as like, I remember the first couple speaking event type things I did, being scared. And they reminded me like, well, everybody's here to see you. We want you here. You've earned the right to talk. And I think that's such a great point to close here on, is that when you're about to go to the next level, we should be thankful that we have that opportunity and that we've had the experience to get us to this level, and then just take the next step. And so I love that we're kind of wrapping up with that.
Yeah, you know, and it's so true, because if you've gotten to that point, like you're pretty smart and know what you're doing, and you just, maybe someone needs to remind you of that. But, you know, it's like the people around you, which is easy to see from the outside, of course, but the people around you are looking at you and, you know, and like being like, yeah, this person did something really great or whatever it is. And, you know, you can, I think you're at that point, like, it's okay to, you know, to ask questions that you don't know the answers to, and to, you know, and to make it feel more collaborative, you know, and being humble, I think goes a really long way, especially from a leader.
For sure.
Absolutely.
All right, let's wrap up with this. I know you have an event coming up, right? Do you want to talk about that at all, to let people know?
Well, I did, but it got changed. So, but thank you for the props. I forgot to tell you guys about that, but I really appreciate that.
Well, follow Alli at everything she's doing on social media. And whenever there is something in the future, you'll be the first to hear about it. Alli, this has been incredible. Thank you so much.
Tons
Thank
of
you,
fun.
guys.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, it was so fun. I really enjoyed it.
All right, take care. Well, if you're still with us, thank you so much. This has been incredible content. 2 full days, jam-packed. This has been great.
What an event. Yeah. My mind is just racing with so many takeaways from everybody that you know, all the questions even that we didn't even get to. There were so many like amazing questions that just didn't make it into the conversations that we're gonna have to circle back in when we're repackaging this content to get out onto the manual and get out into the replays world of, you know, YouTube and all that. So thank you so much for tuning in and having fun with us. We hope you got tons of value out of it. And I love that, you know, you called it out, right? Alli, one of her core tenets of success was training manuals. Was a training
well, that was
process.
a little bit biased.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I know, but she was getting into like the systems
cool.
on that. That was fun.